something that your cousin on Seiko's face.
Well, I was trying to get mine on there, but in any case.
You got two Seikos.
Oh, there's Sam.
There he is.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
that's my favorite Uncle Walter. You're out of all my Uncle Walters, you're my favorite Uncle Walter.
You don't have another one?
I'll tell you, like we say to our son, he's our #1 son.
And my favorite Aunt Dolores.
Hey.
Hello, Aunt Dolores. Here we go. Listen.
There aren't any others, that's for sure, that I know about, and I sometimes wonder. That's okay.
That's good to know.
Stop. Don't even go there.
That's good to know.
Okay. You called a meeting, so convene it.
All right, great. Well, we wanted to get your stories, and I guess the most important thing is we want to make sure that the information that you really want to be able to pass down is passed down. So why don't we start with that? Give us 5 things that you really want to make sure that upcoming generations know.
That I lived and died. One of 7 or 8 kids who did fairly well in life. I don't know. I have a hard time sort of saying what would be the 5 most important things that have happened or occurred in life. It would depend on life as it might have been. If I go to school, then I would have to go to the PhD level, whereas I was elected president of the graduate student body at Syracuse in 1973. And that was a real plus. I was the first Black or African American to do that. Made who's who in American colleges and universities. Was probably able to get some of the graduate thinking away from Black graduate students doing domestic kinds of things as assistantships rather than things that led to their gaining the PhDs and other things that they went there for. And I should tell you that I didn't write a dissertation, and you'd ask me, why not? I got involved in campus politics, and that was the end of the world, you know. So in any case, that would be a real plus. Professionally, I sat on the board, the executive board for the National Dropout Center, which is at Clemson University. I did that for 6 years. I wrote what is now known as a Crystal Star Award, which looks at exemplary dropout prevention programs across the country. I was given a plaque for distinguished leadership and service for that. On that board, which was probably the first one that I had access to big people with monies and that kind of stuff. I often tell the story of working with what was the beginning of this program, and I didn't have the $3,000 that I needed to launch the program or to get the awards for the first conference. And sitting next to me that day at the board meeting was Terry Tingle, who was from CNN News. And afterwards, she said to me at lunch, have your people call my people and tell them what you need. I wasn't quite sure what that really meant. And trying to keep my dumbness undercover, I sort of excused myself and went and called the executive director of the center and said, that's what Terry said to me. What it really meant was that I had to have my people write a letter to her people, and she would provide the $3,000. Well, I milked that for 15 the next time. It went 10 and then 15. Simply by sitting next to her. On that board was Ashland Oil, another one, superintendent of schools. You know, the state of Maryland gave me $38 a day to live off, And I could do that at breakfast with that board meeting stuff. I think that was really a learning experience of dealing with money and people and that sort of stuff, which I think would be something I would probably want to pass on. You have to be at the table, you have to be there, you have to do these things. And to get that award, after I was off the board, I had been on for 6 years. The state had a contractual agreement with me that I could only go to so many board meetings, they'd pay for so many things. But I had a friend on that board who was the deputy superintendent of schools, state of Georgia, and his name was Peyton Williams, or Dr. Williams. And Williams had a travel budget of about $33,000. He says, "Don't worry, we'll take care of you." I didn't have that kind of money. So I think that was a real learning experience. The other boards that I sat on when I directed the New York City Regional Center for Lifelong Learning, that had people on from New York Times, the deans of continuing ed for all the continuing ed schools in New York. And I had to do some legislation work. And so they arranged for me to work out of Senator Garcia's office up in Albany. And that relationship also gave me another one. You probably also know that I was president of the National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth. That was a state thing that came out of the state ed department. That was another board which had people on it like Famous Amos, the cookie guy, people who had, let me say, the board meetings were fun things to do because you would be with them all day and you would learn a lot, and it was because of money that they could do things. So that was another rich experience that if there was some way I could pass some of that stuff on, I would want kids in the family to know. The other thing is, in the Marine Corps, the latter years, I was intel, I was on the commandant staff, and I got to do some stuff that took me into some really top secret areas. And in that, I was on what's called the Defense Intelligence Network, which was an anchor. And that is, I anchored intelligence reports for satellite imagery. Now, I know you can't get into that unless you're an intel, but intelligence. But it would have been, if I had had that kind of opportunity when I first went in the Marine Corps, they would have had me for life, because it took me into a recording studio. I got to write my programs, and unless it was something that they were doing trend analysis or something like that on, and that was really, it was like, who is the evening news character? That was really a wonderful experience as well. So there are just probably lots of things that I now look back on. At the state of Maryland, I sat for the superintendent on the governor's advisory board for homelessness, the commission on fathers that looked at the rights of fathers in the state of Maryland when they had illegitimate children and what were their responsibilities. When I retired, I was given a state citation from the Senate on work that I did with the infants and toddlers in Maryland. I was at the state ed department for 26 years. So that kind of stuff. I handled the state's administration of the program for Katrina. All of those things I did as a superintendent's representative. So I was sent out to do meetings, conferences, and that sort of stuff. And those were some really rich experiences as well. So there are a lot of things that I would probably consider really, really super activities that I've been engaged in. And I think I probably know a little bit about a lot of that stuff that I didn't think I probably would have known about. I don't know if that answers some of what you were looking for.
It does. It does. I'm also interested in learning a lot about what life was like, early life was like in Alabama. So I know everyone in the family well, out of
Well,
the nucleus seemed to
the,
have a very different experience.
well
What was life like in
I should
Atlanta?
like to say what happens to Louisiana's children, but if you the early years in Opelika were, they're in the house with 3 rooms, really. The front room where mom and dad slept with the fireplace and all that. The back room didn't have heat, so that if you had a water in the bucket, it might have frozen at night in the cold. And then there was a little kitchen off to the left, that sort of place. Daddy raised pigs and goats and had a garden and all that, so we ate and that sort of stuff. The difference was Daddy was 30 years older than Mama, and you heard a lot about that old man. I often tell the story of when I went off to Tuskegee, and this is 1963. Daddy came to visit me, and at that point he was walking with a cane. He was down. He was totally gray, whiter than I am, and the kids on the hall thought that it was my grandfather, and I didn't tell them any difference. It was Dad. But if I go back to the early years in Opelika, and I was about, Julia was a baby when Mama left Daddy, and she took the kids and went to Phoenix City, some 28 miles or so away. Sam, all of us, Sam went down, but he came back. Harvey went into the service. So it was that. But I was about 7 years old. So the first year in Phoenix City, we lived at a Cousin Estelle. Cousin Estelle lived in one of those shotgun houses, had a front room, a middle room, and a kitchen, and a toilet outside. It was a flushing toilet, but it was outside. And a couple of houses used that. The first year I was there, and that would have been, I was the 2nd grade, about 7 or so. I went to Mother Mary Mission where Virginia, Annie, I think Julia went there for a while. No, I'll take that back because she was a baby. Yeah, I'll have to think about that at some other time.
Okay.
But the first year there, I went to the mission, and I know Virginia went, and I'm almost believing Annie went there as well. I began playing with a kid by the name of Alan Tucker, and Alan Tucker was a nephew of the person I sent you a paper on called S.E. Allen, Miss Susie. And Miss Susie was the principal of the junior high school there in Phoenix City. Had been, in fact, when she died, they named the school after her. But that play with Alan came through Aunt Julia. Aunt Julia was a member of the church there, Allen Temple. And in playing with Alan, Alan finally went to Ohio. His father went out there, got a job and all of that. His mother taught at the school. And they asked if I could come and live with them. Susie Allen, Martha Allen, 2 sisters, neither of them were married we lived in a 12-room house. At that time, of course, Wheeler, the janitor at the school, did a lot of driving for us. There were housekeepers, that sort of stuff. So Mom said it was okay, and Daddy came down from Opelika, and thus begins my life at the Allens. So that's where I grew up. Miss Allen was the principal of junior high school. I was Miss Allen's boy. There was a lot of protection there. If I was in the Boy Scouts, certain people couldn't come to the house. There was a lot of that. And I have since learned to understand that we were at the top of the totem pole, and I didn't play basketball. They had a goal built on the garage for me to play basketball, and I didn't do it, so they had it taken down because it brought certain kids to the yard that they weren't excited about having there. And they would sort of tell me that. So
When you say that, you said certain people couldn't come.
yeah,
Who were those certain people?
they could be anybody from the neighborhood or that sort of stuff. It could have been somebody that they would have considered lesser. When I say top of the totem pole, Miss Allen was in Iota Phi Lambda sorority, Woman of the Year in '56. When she died, they named the school after her. There's a historical marker there. That was the family that I was a part of. And if you go to some of the other ends of that, one of the bishops of the AME Church, presiding elder bishop, was a Joseph Allen, the founder of the, I guess it would be the Urban League in Ohio, Nimrod Allen, Samuel Washington, a poet, several publications, but I didn't realize all of that. The people came to the house, bishops, presiding elders, and all of that, and I was just there. And it wasn't until after I was probably in my 20s or so that I realized where I was.
What made that family decide that they wanted you to live with?
I told you that I used to play with their nephew. And
Right.
when the father left and went to Ohio to get work and job and that sort of stuff, he wanted his family together. And so Alan left. And that's when they asked if I could stay. And I did. That becomes where I live through high school. So I don't know. I think it was just an experience, and I don't think I realized what was happening. That was when I was here. For instance, I finished high school, and that summer I go to Tuskegee, and I live with Dr. Otis. Dr. Otis did economics there. My kids to play with was the dean of students' children, the postmaster, Black in Tuskegee, Robertson, his sons. I also probably should think of neighborhoods. When I grew up there in the house, the church was across the street. Next door to the church was a professor prophet. Next to him was Mr. Mason, who taught biology at the high school. Next to that was a barber shop, and then it was the Quinn house. Quinn owned the grocery store 2 doors away. Mrs. Quinn taught at the school. She taught 7th grade. The neighborhood, those were the associates. When I go up to Lafayette, which was where Aunt Mamie lived, that was their sister, they had a nice house and a grove and all that sort of stuff. Again, you weren't allowed to just sort of mingle with everybody. So they would arrange little parties or tea things in the grove for me. I assure you that I didn't know any of this. It was just restrictions. One of Sam's questions was, how was I disciplined? Discipline might have been I didn't get to eat dinner and I get sent upstairs to my room. I had a room downstairs and a room upstairs, and the downstairs would be in the winter months, because in the winter months, there would be 3 or 4 teachers who would stay with us, and then they go away. And then I had a room upstairs, which I used to call the sunroom. It had windows on both sides, and you could look out and that sort of stuff. Since folks couldn't really come to the house, it was my way of being out there. So I had whistles with people across the street and things like that. Going to the movies, I often would talk about it. Some of the stories I would tell, nobody would believe them anyway, but she'd actually take me to the movies to see Zorro, because she didn't want me to go. If they're in Phoenix City, she'd take me into Columbus, and Columbus had a Liberty Theater, which was black, and I could go there and she'd take me. Just, I don't know, can I say it was typical? No.
What was the problem with going to Phoenix City to that theater?
It was where the blacks were upstairs and the whites were downstairs, and the black kids would often drop things from the gallery area, and then there would be fights and other things. So they didn't want me to go there. They always said, you can always come home. And so if there was some hocus pocus going on in the neighborhood, the idea was that you would come home, you would not go to that. You would not be a part of that. So going to the theater, you have to realize segregation was there. And it was just not something. I didn't get to ride the city buses until I was a senior in high school. They always sent me places. They collected me. And they didn't believe in leaving me home, so I went to State Teachers Association meetings and sorority meetings and other things like that. You always had a book, and you always had a place to sit or read or do something. Of course, if you'd asked me, I didn't read a lot. I didn't bother with that stuff. But it was the discipline of having good behavior and sitting down with the big shots. So,
well, having that type of experience, which was very different than your siblings,
yeah.
did that put a strain on the relationship between you and them?
At one point, Mama was a good block down the street there in the apartments, the Frederick Douglass homes, I call them the projects. And oftentimes with Maddie and Hattie were the ones that cleaned. And so I could often put some stuff in the basket for Mama, and take it down. So I sort of helped fit them. I'm sure that I paid for Julia's kindergarten or before school at 50 cents a week from the house. I think it was those kind of things. Pluses. I could help. Your father was the other big help, and I'm talking Sam. Sam worked for some clubs.
How so?
Sam worked for some clubs there in Opelika, and he had tips, and every time Mama really needed something, she'd call Sam. Later on, Harvey was able. Mama had a television when they were those big boxes, the little fall screen, long before anybody else in the projects had one. And Harvey sent it there. And of course, we had television. Of course, I had all those things at the house. It was not, I'm saying the house as it was the house. 14, 12 rooms and all of that. I had rabbits as a kid. Didn't know how to take care of them. But Mr. Miller, who was the guy that did my hair, the barber, and his wife taught at the school, built a cage for me. I didn't quite understand when they would pull their fur off and put it in the hole. The south side of the house had a garden area, and that's where I kept her hoppy and jumpy, you know. Didn't have any other. There were stray cats, but they weren't allowed in the house. So I had rabbits as a kid.
Sounds like you had an exposure to the world and piles of education that your siblings didn't have as readily available. They kind of moved towards. Do you think you had any influence on what your siblings did?
Did I have what?
Yeah, Seiko, you're going in and out.
I didn't understand what you just said.
Yeah. So
Okay. Am I better now?
yeah, that's better.
Yeah.
Okay. I was saying that you had with the experience that you had with the Allen family, you had availability to higher education, the business world, some of the movers and shakers and very important people in that area that your siblings didn't have. Did you think that your experiences, when you shared with them what you were doing or what you saw, what you learned, what you experienced, do you think it shaped any of them?
I don't know that it did. I would probably say it did not. It's the have and the have-nots. I don't think it shaped any of them. I would probably say no. Because Sam's world was probably shaped more religiously by people who assisted and mentored and did things for him. Harvey went into the army and then he left home. He stayed at, when I said Louisiana children, I was joking at the front end. When you talk of Harvey sort of lived with the Davises. The Davises was a white family in segregated Opelika. Virginia, who did not go to school. Julia did. I think she had another set of folks pushing her from Opelika, Mr. Morton, who was the principal of the school, and then some others. And I don't know where she got the nursing idea from. She can probably tell you that. But it wasn't from, I think, those early years in Phoenix City. Mom and Daddy were separated for 13 years. And then Julia goes back to Opelika and Eartha. So there was a different set of influences there. If one would talk about what I would want for you guys at your end didn't do it, but what's the name? The younger kids now, Ina's children, Julia's grandchildren, that some of them might look at being doctors or lawyers or engineering or something like that. Sam did some finance stuff, and I think he's still there and beginning to branch out in that area. You would want some of them to go into some of that arenas or those arenas and make a living. I don't think we've had those influences there. So if we look at me, Sam, Sam did complete his dissertation. I never did, although I had one and then I never finished it and did everything for it. what would people want us to leave behind? And that would be that pursuit
Okay.
academically
Academic. That's
and for other career and professional areas. Uh, Shirley and Sam are now playing games with you, YouTube and that sort of stuff. And I think that is really outstanding. And then the books that they have published, now I haven't read it, I haven't had a chance to do that. And it takes a little bit of prep for me to read first to see it, and then have the letters large enough to read it and get the lighting right, you know. But that's there. Annie had some really traumatic stuff when she was trying to get out of high school and become a nun. And now she's Reverend Annie and doing some books and programs and all of that. It's always been there. So I think although they didn't have the same kinds of things that I had, and I don't know if that made me a better person or more academic or what it made me be, other than worrying about my name and how I would be perceived and whether or not I had a good life or that sort of stuff. I think I've had an excellent life. I've traveled and I met a wonderful woman and been able to live with for 55 years or so. So I don't have any qualms there, but I do have qualms about the fact that I never wrote a dissertation. And I have all that capability. In fact, this week, a friend sent me a news clipping from the Syracuse Record when I became president of the graduate student body there in 1973. And I don't think I had a copy of that. There is an archive at Burt Library at Syracuse on the year that I was president of the graduate student body. And I took Eugene in to show him that. And I think I need to put that article in there. By the way, at one point during that pursuit, when I decided to go off, my millers were really low and analytical bit. And Syracuse had accepted me, but then I had sent my name into one of the minority locator services, and there were two schools that were interested in me, Harvard and the University of Arizona at Tempe. And Syracuse had already gotten me there, and I thought, God, with this Miller's like 29 or something, and it should have been a little bit higher than that, I just wouldn't do well. So I went off to Syracuse. I've often said that maybe I should have worked on my Millers and going to Harvard. So I don't know. I don't have any. If there's something that gnaws at me, that gnaws at me, and it keeps telling me that I want to do something.
right.
But right now, I'm just sort of cleaning up the act and making sure there's a will and all those other things in place so that if the COVID had gotten us, we would have been A-okay, and Eugene would have been fine. But other than that, I still have a few years. I don't know.
Okay. So Uncle Walter, so you lived with the Allens. Did you go visit your father like during the summers or at any given
Again,
time?
Mama lived right down the street, and at one point she lived a little bit further up away, maybe 6 blocks or so. It was up through the quarters and across the railroad. And when I'd leave Allen, they'd walk me up to a point or could see me across those railroads. Let's see. I would go to Opelika, but not necessarily to visit Dad.
Okay.
Whenever they went to Lafayette to go to Aunt Mamie's, that was their sister. Then there was a stopover in Opelika
Okay.
because it was en route to Lafayette. I didn't spend summers there. I spent summers primarily in Florida at another cousin on the Allen side.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I wanted Eugene to have some of that experience of family and growing up. And of course, all of us who were here in Washington had that. But in the early years, I used to send Eugene out to your dad in Columbus. You probably remember some of that. I sent him down to Ollie Mae for one summer, so he would know them. When I took him to Phoenix City, we got a tour of the house that I grew up in and the neighborhood, all that kind of stuff. So my family was there and they weren't there.
Okay.
I wasn't a stepchild.
No, we don't think you were a stepchild, Uncle Walter.
You know what I mean by that? It's like being in another family.
Right. Yeah.
And I have two families.
Right.
And it's Alan. I joke with Alan now. I don't know whether or not to call you a brother or a cousin. So I call him brother, a cousin, brother, friend.
Cousin, brother.
And it's the same with his brother. He has an older brother named Henry, and Henry Jr. And a couple of trips to Ohio to family reunions on that side of the house, I'd stay in Columbus with Alan and Henry, and the father and the mother and Sue and Martha would go out to Gahanna. Nimrod had a summer place out there. I'll tell you another one of those. One of the other brothers has a place up in, Martha's Vineyard. And they still run a bed and breakfast there. And it's run by white folks. They are the owners. They are black.
Okay, wow.
There have been some desires to go and do an Allen family reunion there, but it's very expensive, that sort of stuff. So those folks, they were all here, and I've been a part of that existence throughout all of it. In fact, I ran up until 18, the family reunions. I did them for 20 years. And then I decided I didn't really want to do that anymore. I need to concentrate on mine. So I did 2 of them, the one in 7 and then the one in 11.
Wow.
You know about those, Benjamin. See, I call you Benjamin because that's the name, like Eugene.
Yeah, he's okay with it.
So I don't know. You know, it's just living in 2 worlds. That's all.
So,
one of your questions was, how did they show love? And I've had a hard time answering that because collecting and taking and sending was the way I lived. So I would say protective was one of the ways that they show it. And you certainly had all the things that you wanted.
Are you speaking of the Allen family? Was really
well, that's how I grew up. That's where I grew up. There was, I keep telling people, you know, after that 7-year age, I wasn't at home anymore.
right.
I was gone.
before you turned 7.
Before 7 was there in Opelika with Daddy and Mama, and I told you about the 3 rooms. Actually, there were 5 rooms in that house, but Daddy rented out that side of the house, and we stayed on this side of the house.
Oh, wow. But so
So
did you get, how was the discipline from 0 to 7?
I don't remember anything being a discipline. The worst thing I used to think about was going into that room at night and hoping someone didn't wet the bed. You know, when you were at Daddy's, we did go back there a couple of times before I went to the Allens, and Daddy had a friend named Mrs. Lillian who lived around the street on Johnson. There was an alley, and then the Ellis lived there. Daddy, the Ellises, a lot, and then there was Mrs. Lillian. And Daddy would send food over there, and Mrs. Lillian would cook for us. Uh, the early years as a kid, you have to remember, 7 years old and back. I remember when Daddy would kill the pigs and they'd string them up in the tree. Well, we would be sent away somewhere. Cousin Henrietta lived up the street. We could go there. Or Big Mama, which was Henrietta's mother, Mama's aunt, Aunt Willie Woodson, we'd go there. And then there were the Rosses. Mama's daddy, John Wilson, married Selena Ross. And Daddy, Mama's daddy had 2 kids, Mama and Aunt Josie. And Selena Ross had 3 other kids. If we go to Selena Ross' side of the house, Daddy's mother was Selena's sister. So they called Daddy Cousin Will. But what I'm saying about the Rosses is that was the other place we could go. The Rosses had about 10 or 11 kids too, but they always had a lot to eat. They'd make fruitcakes in a thing this size, and there was always food. And Grandpa Wilson grew turkeys. He had pigs, huge garden, all of that kind of stuff. So we would go out there. I remember that. And we went to church on Sunday.
Where?
Thompson Chapel, AME, Zion Church. It was 2 doors, 1, 2, 3 doors up the street. That's where we went. If you went down, there was one house, the Hugleys, and the next house was the Undertaker. And I can remember that. One of the worst scrubbings and cleanings I ever got was a visit down. Tommy Peterson runs Peterson Williams Funeral Home now. And they lived over the funeral home. And I had gone down there, I don't know, play with Tommy, I guess. And Tommy and I went down the back stairs, which was into the embalming room. And boy, Mrs. Peterson scrubbed us. I was raw for a lot of days after that one. I remember that. Daddy owned across from Peterson and Williams Funeral Home what we would call the bottom lip, which was going down the road. But that's where he kept his pigs, the ducks, his goats. Daddy used to drink goat milk right out of the thing. He'd squeeze it right in his mouth.
Oh, wow.
I remember that. Like I said, we always had something to eat at Daddy's. There was always food. He was just older than Mama.
Why did your parents separate?
Getting rid of the old man was a story I heard. I don't know of any other reason.
What
If you
does
look
that
at the kids, Mama was barefoot in the summer and pregnant in the winter. Almost all of us were born in August, September, October. So there. I don't know why they separated. And to this day, I don't know if anybody can tell you that. Harvey talks about their fighting a lot and that there were lots of separations before we came along. And he would end up at Henrietta's. Henrietta's children would be Jim, Maddie, Mary and Ella Lee. They're still they're still there in Opelika. Harvey can talk about that, but again, as a young kid, you didn't know any of that. At least I didn't. But the other thing I mentioned, I jokingly mentioned, who was at the birthday, and I said she pushed me into the fire. I have a burn here.
What?
Uh, there was a little white stool that I was on, and Virginia wanted me off of it, and I wouldn't get off it, so she yanks it from under me, and I go into the fire. And so I was burned up to here, this hand up to here. There's a little bit of a scar here. Annie, you won't know it, but Annie standing in front of that fireplace one day, her dress caught on fire, and I don't know if it's her left or right leg. Sam might know. There's a huge spot on her leg that was more than a second or third degree burn from that fireplace. Mama used to bake potatoes, parch peanuts, cook on the fire, make soup in the pot, and all of that in the fireplace. And that was the only heat in the house, except for the stove back in the back room there. We didn't have one in the back room to the left where you cook food. There was there. There was an ice box. I remember that.
What were the neighbors like?
Right behind us, the Ellis. He worked downtown. I don't know if he was a janitor or what. The big deal with Mr. B was if you saw him coming down the road from the church, and you'd run and open the gate for you, and he'd give you a penny. Boy, was that a big deal, because you could buy a lot with a penny then in terms of candies. Next to them was Charlie Jones. Charlie Jones, I know that his wife took in laundry. I don't know what he did. The Nelms was next, and then Thompson Chapel and the pastor's house. And then on the other side of that was Henrietta. If you went down the hill again, the Hugleys, I don't know. The Hugleys were people that were too black to be white, but too white to be black. And then next to that was Peterson and Williams Funeral Home. So what were the neighbors like? Those were the neighbors. Okay. Dad used to always talk about having 23 kids. And I decided that he was a handsome young man and thin and all of that. When you did visit him in Opelika, he would always make you go visit Martha Bedell. And we never knew why. But then when he died, she shows up at the funeral and she said Dad was her daddy. There was a woman named Frisco who was also there. And I remember the funeral, and these people are boo-hooing. We sort of saying to ourselves, who's that? Who's that? Because we really didn't know. I never got, I guess we got around 13 or so of those kids. Will Alice and Ollie Mae and Charlie, I may have been 18 before I learned that they were my brothers or half brothers. Ollie always said that we were always full brothers, so we had different mothers, and never none of the half stuff. Ollie would cut you down on that, but we don't really know. Daddy used to always talk about a Melissa and Mary, and when we did the reunion in 2007 in Opelika, Julie and I were at the Undertaker, Peterson Williams, and Tommy had us going through we were trying to find out when Grandmother Easter, Daddy's mom, died, and the year that she died. We did find the year, but we didn't find the date. It was 1948. Don't tell me why they didn't put the date in that little card thing that they had there. Well, in going through those files, we found Mary and Melissa, these are wives that Daddy talked about. Mary died of syphilis. Daddy buried her. Ollie talked about another wife leaving after childbirth, and that must have been Melissa, but we don't really know anything about it. So he could have had 23 kids. I don't really know. I'll tell you this one, and it isn't gay or that sort of stuff. Daddy was about 83, and he loved to have you shave him and give him a bath. And I gave him a bath, and he got a hard on. And he said, I bet you thought I couldn't do that. Blows my total mind.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Hey, what can I tell you? Julia learned of Daddy's father, and he had to bury this guy, and he was a Phelps, and you probably heard the Phelps story. I still don't know whether or not she had him before she married John Varner, Esther, or afterwards. We're not sure. But when Julia had to bury this guy, Daddy had glaucoma. I'm sure we never had it diagnosed. He just went blind. And look at me and look at Harvey, look at Sam. All of us have it. When we talked to Ollie about that, this was the clue. We were looking at the census data for 1900 or so, and they had the house, John Varner, Esther, and 2 daughters. We asked the question, where was Dad? He obviously wasn't there because he wasn't on the census, or they didn't list him on the census. And that led to, where was he? And when we brought that up to Ollie, she said we had found one of the skeletons. So Daddy had a different dad other than John Varner. So today I would be Walter Phelps, but I only know the name Varner. So I was born Varner and I'll die Varner.
Yeah, that was the
Harvey
story that
may talk about this. I know Kenneth talks about it because he learned it from Ollie Mae, and it was just like, okay, who is this Phelps guy? But Julia was there at the house when they had to bury him. He had that little pea head that all of them had. And if you got to know Annie Mae Strahan, that was Daddy's sister, and Lizzie Glenn, I knew Annie Mae. I met Ruth, who was Lizzie Glenn's daughter, Crane, who was Lizzie Glenn, his sister's son. If you remember at the reunion, what's her name? Charlesetta Pruitt came. Charlesetta is in that line of folks, as was Lizzie Bell. These were all offsprings of Daddy's sisters. So I've tried, that would be something I would want people to try and continue and get our family tree on a family tree maker, and out of the bull books that we did for 2007 and 11, and continue that. Otis Varner is one of Charlie Varner's, or Daddy's, first family children, son. And Otis, everybody knows, because Otis will send emails and talk to folks and
I guess
all that kind of stuff. More than you probably want him to do it. But Otis has been a kid that of Charlie's. Charlie had about 10 children. They all went to college. I think that's another thing, or a good thing to pass on, you know. But again, no doctors or lawyers. So I would want some people to look at some of that as they go forward.
What was dating like in high school?
I went to the junior and senior prom. My junior prom, Miss Susie drove me. Claude Evelyn's father brought us back. He really didn't bring us back. Roosevelt Red brought us back, but he picked us up. He picked her up out in the front yard. I wouldn't go on the porch that night because the porch light was on and the front door was cracked. So I didn't do much dating otherwise. I can't tell you of a lot of conquests during that time. I was Miss Allen's boy. Clean, decent, all that other good stuff. I was 1 year president for the state of Alabama of the Young People Department for the AME Church. Went to a quadrennial in Detroit and all of that.
All right. Well, when did your conquest begin?
Somewhere around the 9th grade.
Okay.
Barbara Norwood's father ran what would best be considered a club in Columbus that they frequent with the sorority and the Teachers Association. And Barbara was their daughter, and I got to know Barbara, and that would be 9th grade.
Okay, good. I thought the story was going to go in a different direction. All right. What were your 10th grade conquests?
I frankly don't remember that. I don't remember anyone that was that important. Claude Evelyn Carpenter, 10th grade, 11th grade, junior, senior prom, her father did, what do you call it? Carpentry at Spencer High in Columbus. Phoenix City is the only place in Alabama that's on Eastern Standard Time. They use the same transportation system and all that other stuff. We lived up in what would probably be North Phoenix City, and I went to high school in South Girard, which would be South Phoenix City. And in order to get to high school, you went on 14th Street into Columbus, down Broad Street, and back across the bridge and then into the south. And when there were lots of fights with us white kids and black kids on the buses, when I say us, I wasn't us because I wasn't there. They gave us a bus that went from North Phoenix City to South Phoenix City. And that's when they started allowing me to ride the city buses to go to school. Otherwise, I went with one of the teachers' husbands or wives who taught at the high school, and they taught at the what was Phoenix City Elementary and Junior High School.
Okay.
So I don't have my senior year. Her name was Regina Jackson. She is now married, lives in California. I think there was a period. The minister of the church, his name was Reverend Ezekiel, had a daughter named Frances. Frances played the piano, and she accompanied me. You know, I played tenor sax in high school.
No.
I had my own saxophone. They bought it. But Frances would be probably the closest person I would have had a relation. We talked a lot on the phone and all that sort of stuff, but we never went dating or that sort of stuff. I got news for you. They gave me a coming out party. Now you're saying a coming out party? I never had parties at the house, but in my senior year, I had a party. Okay.
And a coming out party.
I jokingly call it a coming out party because I never had parties. So for me to have a party, that was big.
What was your party like?
There was music. There was one of the teacher's son, his name was Cornell Miller. Cornell Miller sort of jokingly said the only reason they all had me there was I was screwing both of them. Well, that turned it out. Bad, bad, bad.
That's so awful.
What can I tell you? I was Miss Allen boy. I went to summer camp at Boy Scout camp. I went to camp in Fort Benning, Georgia, to Boy Scout camp. My dearest friend, Horace Payne, lived across the parking lot. I could play with Horace. Horace could come to the house. Don't ask me why, he was allowed. But everybody else, they would treat them nice and then tell me not to have them back there anymore. I have to cautiously tell that story because then it sort of saves class.
It does.
And I don't want people to know that they were that way. But it was that way.
Mhm.
How did that impact the way that you dealt with the rest of the world?
How did that?
Impact the way you dealt with the rest of the world? You know, when we talk about our
Oh, you'd sneak and do things. I had one or two things that happened in my life in that sense. Once I took the car from the backyard and I went out, had a flat tire. Wheeler had taught me how to fix those, so I did it and put the car back and drove it back. They missed the car and they called the police. And I drove the car back into the driveway, closed the gate, and came in through the back of the house. Now, Wheeler was part of I could sneak out of the house, lock my door to the hallway. That was my room downstairs.
Mhm.
And I could go out the back window. Wheeler hooked the back window up with a hook so I could sneak out. Well, that night when I got back, the cop car is out front and I see it. And I sneak back into the house and I go, if you went in through the kitchen, the dining room, the living room was on that side, and on this side, what was the laundry room and my room, and then two other rooms and a guest bedroom. And then there was a center hallway. I was at the back of the hallway. It used to be the hallway before I arrived there. And then it was made into a room. I had a cot, a small desk, a chest of drawers, and that sort of stuff. And you entered it from the hallway. It was at the end of the hall. Well, I go into the living room and the window's open. I can hear her talking to the police. And she says, well, we've pretty much decided that Walter took the car. He's not here. And we should probably allow him to be arrested or something to frighten the hell out of him. But they didn't do that. And I think I got about 2 or 3 days of not getting an evening meal after that one.
Mhm.
But other than that, yeah. So I did do some things. That was one of them. I don't think I can tell you about too many others, because I didn't do too many other things. I just didn't.
So after high school,
I went to Tuskegee the summer, stayed at Dr. Otis's. Well, I guess that was not an eventful thing. Otis, I never applied to Tuskegee and all of that. Otis was to take care of all of that. Otis got married in the summer. His wife, Frankie Williams, whatever, and I didn't get along. She thought she had a boy Friday there, and we had lots of words. So at the end of the summer, he brought me home. And so for the first semester, which would have been September, I wasn't in school. I didn't go to Tuskegee until the spring semester because I had no applications or any of that kind of stuff. Otis was to take care of all of that, and he didn't. He brought me home, and I might have been in a liquor, so she decided that I should go and get a job. And one of her sorority sisters ran a personnel agency. So she got me a job at the dolling shop there on Broad Street, cleaning windows, mopping the foyer and all that sort of stuff. And I did that. And a job that paid a little bit better was at Morrison cafeteria. And then I got that. Well, they didn't like that one, so they had me drop that one because it meant that I couldn't come to church on Sunday. I had to go to work. And that was not good for them. So in the spring semester, I did go to Tuskegee though, not with a lot of help from them. I went as a work study student. Your brother Sam had worked out at Howard House in West Hampton Beach. So I signed their names to something and went there in the summer. And that got me out of Alabama. I never wanted to come back. But she got me on the wheel. If I came back to Tuskegee, there was money in the will to take care of me. My 58 Chevrolet, all of that was hooked on my coming back. So you would see that in 61, 62, I did go back to Tuskegee for another year. Mamie controlled the funds. And Mamie and I, by the way, didn't get along very well either. But it wasn't a hate thing. It was just that I was beginning to fill my oats, and that was about the size of it. The 58 Chevrolet, Sue died in 61. I was in New York. I did come home for the funeral. And she left the car with Aunt Mamie. Well, I went in the Marine Corps in 64. Aunt Mamie didn't use that car. So she put it up on jacks in there in Lafayette in the garage. And when I came out of the Marine Corps, she said, well, why don't you come down and get your car? And so Dolores and I had gotten married at that point, and we went to Alabama to get my car, a 58 Chevrolet, and I drove it. I had that car up until, I don't know how many years ago. And I kept it up in Mount Airy. When we lived in the Winnicksburg here in Maryland, I drove it. And at Syracuse, I drove that car. So 73, 74 at Syracuse, that was our transportation. It was also how we went to Maine for a number of years with Dolores' family. I don't know where all of this goes.
It just goes. No, this is great. I mean, you're telling us a lot of stuff. I mean, which is good. That's the reason we're doing all of this, you know, to capture you all's life story and the essence. Because growing up, you know, you mentioned Opelika in Phoenix City. And I would be honest, I had no idea Phoenix City was in Alabama. My mother mentioned it, and I was like, but I remember at one point, I think she lived with Mamie.
That was in Phoenix City.
Yeah, okay, so that was in Phoenix City. Okay, and
I hadn't thought about that when I said Louisiana's children and the households that they grew up in.
Yeah.
But Annie got into that, taking care of Robert Lester and the other kids. And it was just like a little babysitting thing. They lived up the street.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mama lived down the street. And it was just something else.
So one of my questions for you is, how have you, because you all as siblings are extremely tight and extremely close, even though you all grew up in different households. How were you all able to maintain that strong bond despite living in different households, even though you all were generally in the same area more or less at times?
I don't know. I guess we all love Daddy and we all love Mama. And although I was up the street living in the big house, Mama was right down the street. She was there. Annie, Julia, Eartha, they were there. Sam was with Daddy, but he was there. Harvey had gone into the service, but everybody sort of took care of Mama, and Mama was the link. You know, you see, you would wonder, well, I would, as an adult, would probably realize now that age difference between Mama's 30 years and Daddy was just something, that you can only give it up to sex, it wasn't something that matured out of something. I think they forced him to marry her. So it's like, yeah, but we always had each other, and that was always there. And though they were separated, he was still Daddy. And then they sort of go back to each other after 13 years or so, and the link was always there. Ollie and Will Alice, like all of us, the males at least, can tell you about having lived at Will Alice. I did, Sam did, Harvey did. She was the New York connection. That's what got everybody to New York.
Okay, that was going to be my question as well.
Yeah,
Like,
so it's,
okay.
I guess we just love each other and we care. And we remember Will Varner and his saying, you could always be somebody. You can always grow up to be somebody. Or I remember his saying things like, if they give it to you, always say thank you and be thankful they did. And then you can go right to the garbage can and throw it out.
My mother would
get rid of
that
it.
story too.
So he did the yards of leading people in Opelika. So they sort of took care of him. And the owner of the bakery there would give them the stuff to feed his hogs and that sort of stuff. He just had to go down there and pick it up at 3 o'clock in the morning,
Yeah.
But some of it would be good or day old stuff. And that made it to the refrigerator. The rest of it went to the pigs. Burra Bill. When I was trying to figure out the ownership and all that other stuff of his mother's house, and was going through the records there in Opelika, I found that he had several pieces of property. Daddy didn't read or write, and how he did that, I think, is amazing. And who was that? But his friends were Clement Talbot, leading white citizen, and he did his yard. Mr. Pitts, he did his yards. He planted things for them, that sort of stuff. I would even say that he might have been the person that did the plowing and that sort of stuff, because at some point Daddy had mules up on the hill and or down the hill. So he had to use them in some way. And I think it was that. He knew how to plant things. He knew how to make foundations. I remember some of that in the backyard with concrete and wires and that sort of stuff. He could measure things. But I think their love and caring for each other and that sort of stuff. Before Daddy died, we bolted the bed to the floor in one of the apartments. They were living there on Cherry Lane in Opelika. And that was because he would rip up the stuff that you didn't have sewn down and that sort of stuff. And he'd always try and hide people. And we assumed that that was some of the stuff that he experienced that might have been lynching or that kind of stuff. And when he got up in age and that sort of stuff, it became evident. So, I don't know, we just loved each other. That's all.
That's interesting. My father told a story about how he and his father cut down a man who was lynched in Opelika, and they had to do it uh, very early in the morning, 3 or 4 in the morning after the Klanmen left. And he said that his father did that frequently. So whenever a person was lynched in that area, it was your father's, I guess, duty, or he made it his duty to give that man a proper burial. And so my father said that he saw that 2 or 3 times, and it kind of really shaped his thoughts.
And when it was he batty or crazy? I don't think so, but it was doing those things that allowed you to know something about something that had happened that was really dreadful, and it was coming back at that point. Julia can talk about the Ku Klux Klan and Aunt Julia and Uncle Joseph. Aunt Julia would be Mama's great aunt, and the Klan burning a cross in front of his place there in Phoenix City, and Julia was there. She can talk about that. So it happened. It was, that's one of the things that I can talk about at the house, was that I was never allowed to be anywhere that there would be the possibility. And by taking me and sending me and picking me up and all that sort of stuff, it eliminated those exposures. And then at the other end of the totem pole is being around the families that were the movers and shakers in the community. So you didn't see any of that.
So tell me about the New York migration. Like, who was the first of your siblings to go to New York? And
It
then
would have been Harvey.
William Harvey? Okay. Uncle Harvey.
And Harvey, I didn't go until after 61 or 62. And I'm thinking Virginia was already there. When Virginia went to Harvey, all the others of us can talk about going to Will Alice's. Harvey, Sam, myself. And then Julia can talk about all of the things that Will Alice did in terms of getting her clothing and sending food down to Howard. Ollie didn't do a lot of that, but Ollie worked for, I think it's the Belts department store people. It appears that she might have been a housemaid and that sort of stuff, but Julia can talk about some of the clothing and things that she got from Ollie through that department store. Ollie had a friend named Roberta, and Roberta was the cook. And we used to think that Ollie would be the great cook. It was Roberta who did the cooking. And so on one of Ollie's trips up here, we wanted to make some macaroni and cheese, and she really didn't know how to do that. We thought it was strange. And then she was trying to tell us how to make rolls with biscuit. Boy, were they hard as a brick. The next time she came up, she brought them with her. Those were done by Roberta. And I now can make rolls based on Roberta's recipe. Roberta, one of the years, Dolores and I went on the cruise, and Roberta came up to stay in the house with Ollie. And well, Roberta was a really close friend. The first time we did it, we had Chi Chi here. Was that a trip? We bought food and did everything that would have allowed them to have food for the week and that sort of stuff. They ate the stuff that was in the freezer, not the stuff we left here. And I was sort of like, okay. There was even chicken bones under the bedroom upstairs, under the bed. We'll never do that again. Okay, enough secrets.
You've been known as Uncle Moneybucks.
Money bucks?
Moneybucks.
I have a little bit of money. I'll tell you that.
You said earlier that you learned how to handle and deal with money.
Not really. We did a lot of initial savings bonds kinds of things. When we bought this house, we needed $32,000 for a down payment. 29,000 of it came from those little $25 and $50 savings bonds. When Mama used to come up from Alabama and she'd bring all of her change she'd been saving, and she would want to buy bonds for Tony, that was Eartha's first child. And I put those bonds in my name and Social Security. And when he finished school, or whatever, one of those bonds collection was like $800. And so I gave them to Eartha, and of course, you know, they spent them. And then that year we got a notice from Income or IRS that we did not report this interest. And we said it was from the Bureau of the Public Debt. And we said, what the hell is that? And we found out it was those bonds. So I now don't do that. If I give you a bond, it's going to be in your Social Security number. But the other thing I did in terms of coming up with a little bit of money is we did deferred compensation. So as we grew, and Dolores and I, and we made more money, if we had lived off 40,000 one salary, then we could take that, whatever the increase was, and put it away. And we did that. The only horror with that was we should have put it away after taxes as opposed to before taxes, because now everything is being hit. One of my allocations that I get every April is from a 401k, and it's a $13,000 allocation. You know how much of that I get? $8,500. So it's knowing that kind of stuff. I probably would not have refinanced several times and spent money. You know, we have lived rather extravagantly.
Yes, you have.
So that I probably would not have done if I did it over again. But I don't regret it because I don't have to worry about it. And I have insurances and all that kind of stuff for living to be old, and long-term health insurance, and it costs a fortune. But I don't have any worries in terms of that. If the two of us need anything, we certainly don't have to help anybody. And that is, we don't have to have anybody help us. Let's say it that way.
That's good.
And I think, well, I don't know. See, again, Sam, they were doing some kind of little club a while. And then I don't know what happened, that fell apart. But in any case, it's that kind of thinking and knowledge of that. It wasn't something I learned. If I did, I probably would have done it over. But when I began the quest to do that, we were thinking that I didn't want to have to worry about working after 65. I think that was the magic age at that point. And I certainly would probably stop when I was 55. So, and that was financial planning and how much we had to put away each month in order to get to that point. And so one of those little nickel things is worth about 60,000 now. And that's out there that I could put my hand on tomorrow.
That's good.
I'm going to stop because that's a I don't want people like
I understand.
like my nephew Kevin called a month or so ago, and he was trying to get me to co-sign for a car. Of course, I won't do that. I did that for Kiana, and that was a disaster. That's how I bought my first Kia. It was easier to buy a car than to worry about having to pay for something that you didn't have and didn't own anymore, that you had given up to repossession. So he is calling to ask me to co-sign, and I told him the story of Kiana and all of that. I just would not do that. I co-signed for Godson, and what was a $13,000 is must be about 26 or 27 now, because I refuse to pay it. Although I get hammered all the time from whatever that Navient is now, but it used to be at Fannie Mae or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I refuse to pay it. So I get those calls, and then I've had to get a lawyer a couple of times to write letters and cease and desist and all that. I wouldn't do that again. But I think some thinking along those lines would be adequate for people to begin thinking about it. And you do it when you're young enough that you can not do it. For example, I put Ava in a $25,000 policy. It was called a Grow Up thing. When she gets 18, it doubles to 50, but the premium doesn't double.
That's good.
And she'll have it the rest of her life if she chooses to do that.
Right.
As long as I'm alive, I'll pay it. But it's like $300. Let me go out there and try and get $50,000 worth of life insurance at this point in life. You know what it would cost me? Somewhere close to $1,000 a month.
Yep.
You need to do some of those kind of things early and just sort of set them aside.
Right.
And it's, I don't think anybody talks about that, but that's another way of, you can at least achieve wealth that way, because then you can leave a trust fund, and that'll send some dollars out there as long as you keep the principal in place.
That's true.
That would be something I would want the kids in the family to learn how to do or to know about, so that you could not have to worry about everything the rest of your days. Now, that doesn't mean I don't have bills, because I eliminated all my credit cards except for one, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. I kept American Express, and then Dolores kept bothering me about why am I paying $95 a year for something I don't use. And I finally agreed with her, stopped. And whenever they bother me about making a purchase, something like that, I said, okay, we can spend $10 and that'll get us off of them. And they won't cancel the card because you need it for your credit score. Yeah. Okay, Sam, it's your turn.
It's my turn. Okay. So do you know much about, was grandma and grandpa, were they born in Opelika?
As far as I know, they were born in Opelika.
Okay.
Yeah. Will Alice's birth certificate says that he was 33 years old when she was born. Problem I had with my birth certificate was his name is Will Varner. I was Walter Eugene Varner Jr. When I joined the Marine Corps at 21, I had to join the Marine Corps as Walter Eugene Varner Jr., but there was no way I could be a junior because his name was Will and he didn't have any other names. The Marine Corps made me join as Walter Eugene Varner Jr. And then later we went through that bit with vital statistics in Montgomery.
Mm-hmm.
And the final resolution of that was that all of the children born to this union, the father's name was Will. There was no way I could be a junior. but I still use the name Walter Eugene Varner Jr. I don't use Jr., I use Walter Eugene Varner Sr. But he was born in Opelika.
He was born in Opelika.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Mama was born in Opelika.
Okay. Do you know anything about her mother and father?
Do I know anything about her mother and father? I knew Grandpa Wilson.
Okay.
Her mother was dead when we were at the age that we would know grandparents.
Okay.
But again, Grandpa Wilson married her name was Selena Christian. It would have been Selena Williams Christian. And we would go to Grandpa's. And we always went there around Christmas and that sort of stuff. Again, they made fruitcakes and big things like this. But there were, what's her name? Leida, which would be Mama's sister if they were the same mom and dad. But the mother married Mama's daddy, and that was after Mama's mother died. There was always food there. I mentioned earlier he grew turkeys. There were horses there, cows, pecan grove, corn in season, chickens, eggs. And they were down the alley, up the street, and down to Grandpa's house.
So, do you
But
have?
they all came out of Opelika.
Okay, they did. So, I mean, we all know that Mama was always a very silent person. But do you have any interesting or funny stories or anything like that about Mama?
No,
No.
no. She was always that way. One would have assumed if one looked at that, there might have been some developmental something, but it was not evident.
That's what my father would say. My father said if his mother were born now, I mean, was like a teenager, or in today's society, she would have been considered a person with a disability.
But other than that, no. She was just quiet. But then, see, Sam and Kenneth and what's her name, Kenyatta, and all of them who grew up in the household there with her would have a different story.
Yeah.
She helped them with their homework, and we wondered how. But don't tell Julia that. I don't know.
Yeah.
It was just who was helping who.
She had times where she just talked. I mean, I have times sometimes she would just tell a story out of nowhere. She would just tell a story about a horse kicked her. She would just randomly tell a story, and then she would just kind of get quiet and, watch TV. She would say little things here and there, but I just remember Grandma was just always very quiet, always very silent. And
in fact, when we did her funeral there in Opelika, we had one here in Washington, and then Reverend Wilson, who had been at the church for a number of years, was also sort of into some of Sam going to, Salisbury. He talked about this quiet lady. That was his sermon about it. We had a service there and a service in Washington. He talked about this quiet lady. She didn't talk. She didn't say much, but he thought she was thinking, and you knew she was there. She had a presence.
Yes, she never said much, but you always knew she was in the room.
Yeah.
And she would always let you know, just because I'm not saying anything doesn't mean I'm paying attention. Because she would tell me, she'd say they think I don't hear nothing. And she would repeat a lot of things. Oh God, this is being recorded. What y'all do? But she would repeat a lot of things verbatim. And it's like, yeah, I heard everything. Because one day she told me, she said, when I want to talk, I talk. If I have something to say, I have something to say. And if I don't have something to say or I don't want to talk, I don't want to talk. And I don't care who's talking to me. Yes, ma'am.
That was it.
That was it in a nutshell, you know. So that's how I remember Mama. So
Wow, I never got that chance to really spend a lot of time with Mom.
yeah, see, she lived with me, you know, with my mother for a year. So for me growing up, that was part of my childhood, was having her there. So I had my mother and my grandmother. So
Well, my father also had a little discontent with his mother. Yeah, there was some anger between my father and his mother, and you know, interesting. My mom's here listening now, but my father told me the story that one of the things that Ron, you know, and wife, his Ruth, really taught him was to really appreciate his mother. Because he said, I really didn't think much of her. You know, she left for some younger man, and then when he was done with her, they came back, and he would say stuff like that.
Well, you know, Eartha was born. See, I'm really telling the secret now. Eartha was born there in Phoenix City, and the person that I would have considered Eartha's name, and I don't really know his name. They used to call him Dump, and Daddy knew about Dump. I don't know whatever else. Harvey sort of hints that there was some looseness there, but the other thing was, again, Daddy was 30 years older than she was, and that had to have had some impact on her in terms of her and men.
Yeah.
And I think well, Harvey and Sam probably knew about some of this stuff. It's like my name, Eugene. I don't know that he wasn't a insurance man. Why did she name me Eugene? Sam could probably tell you, or Harvey could tell you who the person was. I don't know. And it wasn't something I ever really asked her about. It's just, you know.
Yeah. My father hinted around that. I never got that full story. He did tell me that Eartha was raised by his father, but it wasn't her birth father. That's what he told me.
And I understand that he may have said that to Eartha. And
my father also shared with me that his father had a lot of friends outside of Mama too.
Of course, like I said, those children, the Bedales,
Right.
Arthur Bedell, Frisco, those folks were around us there. There was Mrs. Lillian, one of those daughters in her later years, according to Harvey and Kenneth. I'm talking Kenneth Harvey's son now. Her name was Juanita, and Juanita thinks the dad was her dad.
Was Miss Lily one of the people who used to cook for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think he had a relationship with her. I would say there was no reason for this woman to be as kind and as generous to us as she was. Otherwise. Now, I can say that as an adult, and an adult who understands a lot of sexuality and that sort of stuff. It would have been only normal. You wouldn't want to go around thinking that your mother was a slut or something like that, but it was only normal. And the other one would be when we did the DNA thing with the Varners for that the second reunion.
Mhm.
Right.
And we were trying to connect with that other Varner family. It didn't happen. Sam and I, and one of them, and we weren't on the same DNA. Now, my thinking about that since then has led me to believe that maybe John Varner was doing some stuff, because Daddy was the only other Varner in Opelika other than John Varner at the time, Black Varner. If
I
you went
heard
up the road to Casita a few miles up, you would
Oh,
found
yeah.
white Varners. And the first encounter with that was when I was at Tuskegee, and George Varner downtown had the same last name. And whenever I would say that, people would often wonder if we came off the same plantation. But there were a whole bunch of them in Casita, Varners. And Ollie's mother and grandmother worked for them. So it could have been one of them. I don't know. But somebody gave that woman the name Varner, and she used it on the child. I have often thought that maybe I want to try and get his birth certificate or death certificate, and then it might say who his parents were. Usually those things do, and people are usually upfront about that when that happens.
Right. Right. Yeah. One of the other stories that my father used to talk about was how his father, your father, told my father that your mother actually came to take care of your father's wife in her last, she was dying, and your mother came, and she was the help. She was like a helpmate to take care of her while your father went to work. And after that woman died, then your mother stayed, and later on they got married.
Yeah, I'm that story isn't very clear. Ollie, who was around during that time, would never really talk much about it. She would just say, and wouldn't say much. So we don't really know, because that was one of the stories. And another one would have been he just had sex with her. And that began it. And the child that would have come out of that would have been John Will. And John Will was before Harvey. So
Whoa,
we don't really know.
John Will was before Harvey.
Yeah, there was a child before Harvey.
What happened to him?
As far as we know, he just died early, or he may have died as a child. There was another child in between Annie and I, and his name, by the way, was Benjamin.
Yeah, I was named after him.
Okay, well, that Benjamin is buried at the foot of Grandpa Wilson, Mama's daddy. So that's there in Opelika. But I remember him as a child. He had what we would call a waterhead.
Right, right.
So he didn't live longer than 2 or 3.
Yeah.
He died on a Sunday morning.
My father said he died in his hands.
Okay. But he died on a Sunday morning. That I remember. And that's before that 7th year. I am saying and have said that I went to the Allens when I was about 8 or 8 and a half. Well, if Julia was born in 48 and Julia was a baby at the time they left, and Mama and Julia sat up in the front of the truck with Aunt Willie's son. You see, his name is escaping me right now. Aunt Willie would be Mama's aunt. And he drove us to Phoenix City to Aunt Julia. Aunt Julia would be Mama's aunt. But, and again, I had that 1 year in the Catholic school, and then the next year I was at S.E. Allen. S.E. Allen was the name of the school. It was named after Sue. It was the Phoenix City Elementary and Junior High School. And when they built a new building there, it became the Phoenix City Elementary and Junior High School for Negroes, right on the front of the building. Hey, everybody's quiet. I must have given you too much to think about.
I mean, this is all good stuff. I mean, Seiko's been
Right.
sitting on a lot of stuff. I think we're gonna have to interview you next, Seiko, in place of your father, with you and your mother sitting next to you. Like, I think that has to be the next one right there, because every time we do one of these, I'm learning more and more.
My mother asked about a Ruth Varner, not her, but there was another Ruth Varner in the family.
I think it was John Varner.
Was she connected with John Varner?
There wasn't a Ruth that I know of. There was a Ruth that is the daughter of what's her name? Lizzie Glenn Lockett Williams something. She had 2 or 3 husbands, but Lizzie Glenn was Daddy's sister. Annie Mae Strahan was the other one. Lizzie has a daughter named Ruth. Ruth is dead. And Ruth's daughter would be, she came to the reunion. Oh, Lois. It's Lizzie Lois Bell. She's still alive. She lives in Detroit. Her birthday is in April. I will talk to her then. But that would be the Ruth. But she wasn't a Varner.
Mhm.
Well, that's what I saw on it. I've been trying to get more.
All right, my mother's sharing that she stays on Ancestry.com and has a premium account, so she's been doing a lot of research. And she saw a Ruth Varner that was connected to my father's family, and about it.
Well, last year or year before last, I don't really remember. There was a guy, his last name is Crumbs. He lives in Florida someplace. And his dad was a Varner. And he was doing some research on it. And somehow he got to Liz out in Detroit. And Liz says he should talk to me. I would know. Well, the guy called and he said he was in the cemetery in Opelika and he saw a Will Varner and Louisiana Varner. Who are those folks? And I said, those are my mom and dad. Well, that guy is on John Varner's side before John Varner. He might have a whole bunch of stuff. I had said to Julia, had we thought about it, when we did her 70th, we should have invited him up. And I still think, I'd like to invite him up just to find out what he has found out. I haven't talked to him in a while, but I could certainly ask him that question, whether or not there was a Ruth Varner on there. But there isn't a Ruth other than the Bell, and she wasn't a Varner. She was Lizzie Glenn Lockett.
Okay.
Unless, see, there's something else we may know. That might be another skeleton.
Bring it on.
So I don't know. What I'm saying is, Ollie, whatever you stumble onto something like that, and if she knew something about it, she'd tell you it was a skeleton, which meant that they had buried it and nobody talked about it.
Right.
So this Varner could be a skeleton that nobody knows about.
let's talk about that DNA test. My mother's interested, seeing if there was any indigenous, Native American ancestry. So, what
I
did the
never got a
DNA?
written out thing on that. I still have the record of it, and I'm probably sure that I could get it. The other end of that was whether or not Esther didn't have some of that in her. As a kid, my hair was red. Julia talks about somebody in Opelika seeing her and said, you must be Red's granddaughter, looking at her and her hair. And I'm saying Red was Esther or Easter, whichever way you want to spell her name. I think it's Easter.
Yeah, I think it's Easter.
So there might have been some relationship there to some Indians. I don't know.
Okay.
But I don't know what tribe or any of that kind of stuff. I thought
How
at
did
some
you
point you might have been interested, I'm talking Seiko now, and you were going to probably pursue that to find out I think Sam knew where he came from that way. I don't know.
And I didn't. Yeah, I didn't. How did you meet Aunt Dolores?
At Will Alice's church there in the Bronx, called William Zion Church. When I was at Will Alice, that's where I went to church. And Dolores, his family was there. And that's how I met Dolores at church.
All right, tell us about the
It was
courtship.
not a love at first sight and all that good stuff, because I think Dolores was interested in some other folks. I told one of those stories at the 50th anniversary when I decided I'd talked to her uncle who raised her about marrying her and that sort of stuff. Somewhere on an onion skin is that letter where I wrote to him asking whether or not I could marry her and that sort of stuff. Dolores' family goes to New Orleans, and we weren't a couple then, and then they come back, and that's when we got together.
Okay.
But it's not a long courtship, and it isn't something where you saw bells and whistles and a Star Spangled Banner came up in the fireworks. No, didn't happen that way.
How did it happen?
Hmm?
How did it happen?
Well, at the point that I became really totally interested,
Yes.
we went on a Wildwood, New Jersey trip one day, and we held hands and stood on the bottom of the stairwells and smooched and did things, but we weren't doing a lot of anything else. And in fact, one of the stories I often talk about, I'd come home from the Marine Corps and they were living in St. Albans, and I would go out to visit. Well, from the Bronx to St. Albans is about 3 hours when you took the subway, and then you had to take a bus to get there. And then you had 3 hours to get back. So they would allow me to stay there in the basement. And they decided it was cold down in the basement. So one of those visits, they said I could sleep in the dining room upstairs. So they put a cot there. And early the next morning, Dolores came down and we were on the cot sitting there. Hadn't done anything and that sort of stuff. And boy, did I get the thrashing of my life about sex before marriage and all that other stuff. And gee whiz, she'd only sat on the couch. She hadn't done anything. But that was Honey. That was the person that raised her, you know. Well, I was at that point back down in the dungeon. Nah. There isn't much
What was it
to say.
what was it like raising Eugene?
What was it like?
Yeah, being a father. What was your fatherhood experience like?
Oh, of course, I would have wanted my father to be a little Lord Fauntleroy as I was. Uh, that, well, let's say we were married 6 years before Eugene was born. We both needed to finish school, and we sort of thought, well, Dolores had more college than I had, so we get her through, and then I would go, and then the family got on us about having a child, and we just really weren't ready, but we finally, got so much pressure on that. Okay, we're gonna do this, and we did. Well, she didn't get pregnant, and everything we did. If you told me to get it in a tub and sit in a bone water and whatever you told me to do, I would do it. And Dolores didn't get pregnant. It was like, if I talk about another sister of mine, it seems like that she opened her legs, she got pregnant, Eartha. But in any case, it was sort of like, okay, I had a friend named John Rossi in the Marine Corps, and John and his Sandy had a similar situation. And John was about sperm count and weakness and all that other stuff. He had to take medication and that sort of stuff. And he told me that story, and I thought, well, maybe that's what the problem is. So then we went to see a doctor, and he just said, go home and relax. Well, Dolores had been on birth control pills, and then there was a period that the body had to get rid of all of that. I don't know anything medically about it, but that was one of the stories the doctors told us. And he said, come back in about 3 months. She got pregnant during that time. So Eugene was born 6 years after we were married. And once he came, we sort of thought, oh God, we maybe need to let him have 2 or 3 years before we have another one. And we never had the other one. So if she had been a girl, she would have been Melissa. That must have been the name on Peyton Place at the time. So having a son was good. And if we look at that, Sam had 2 boys, Harvey had 2 boys, and then some girls. So we don't know, Ruth. If you had had more, maybe we would have had some girls.
All right. What did you have enough of an experience with your father to know what to do as a father?
No. I would say that I didn't have a father. When the dedication of the S.E. Allen Elementary School was done, I was the speaker. And I talked about having lots of fathers. One of them would have been my scoutmaster. Another one would have been Mr. Bales, who used to take me to high school in the morning. Another one would have been Mr. Bibb, who was the husband of the athletic teacher at S.E. Allen. Mr. Quinn, who lived up the street. Mr. Mason, who lived across the street. And whoever the pastors of the church may have been. Those were the men in my life. So I can't really say much about Daddy in terms of that. But I had a whole bunch of dads. And then my ace would have been Wheeler the janitor, who taught me to drive, who took me to swim classes, who took me to Boy Scout camp, those kind of folks. Uncle Henry would have been Alan's dad. And Uncle Joseph, who was Aunt Julia's husband, was there in Phoenix City. So I had father figures. And then there was Mr. Thompson, who prop, as we used to call him, who did basketball and all that other stuff. His wife taught at the school. She did 2nd grade, I think, Eva Simpson Thompson, and Prop did 8th grade. You had single teachers during those times. You didn't have multiple teachers.
What was the hardest part about being a father?
The hardest part about being a father was having a kid who operated on a different world and didn't want to do all the things that I wanted him to do in terms of, well, let's say, during some of his early years, I was a commissioner, children and youth for Montgomery County. I was doing reserves on one weekend a month. I was also a scoutmaster and spending time with him. Uh, Matty lived with us the first 3 years of his life, so we had somewhat of a live-in babysitter. And so I didn't have to worry about potty training or any of those kind of things. And neither did Dolores, because Matty did all those things. At some point, it was easier to put him in school at 3 than it was to find another babysitter. And that's what we did. I wouldn't do that again. Because at 3, Eugene was going to school in a shirt and a tie and gray pants. By 5, he didn't know how to play or do any of those things. Smart as all get up. He was always smarter than I am. And that was a problem. I didn't know this until we came to Maryland, and he had been going to private schools and that sort of stuff. And he was just a disaster in that public school. One of my friends suggested we move far enough out in Montgomery County that we could put him in public schools, because I couldn't afford to pay the private school rates here as compared to New York, where we were. And at some point, because of his behavior and all of that other stuff, they had us one of these meetings where the psychiatrist and all those folks, and the school lawyer and all those folks are there, and us and I needed to have brought a lawyer to the meeting. But they had him tested, and Eugene was 3rd grade. He was functioning 9th through 12th grade. And we didn't know that. That was really difficult time, because then the shrink was telling me that I need to spend more time with him, and he didn't want to spend any more time with me. And it was sort of rebelliousness. It was also during a time that we still had the house in New York, and the tenants learned how to up the oil thing, and God, we could barely afford to live. And I left Medgar Evers after 13 months, and I shouldn't have done that, but I did. And then I didn't have a job. So I had to deliver phone books and do all kinds of things to make a living, pay the mortgage, and live here in Maryland. And I think that was a difficult time with Eugene. But when I was a commissioner in Montgomery County, one of the people was on the board up at, what's that school? Brown? Mm-hmm. And she was talking about getting Eugene into Brown. And I said, I can't afford that. And so there were some interest groups here that would help the Brown kids with funding and money and all that sort of stuff. And one of the things I had to take him to was one of those meetings. And I had to dress him in certain things, like a rugby shirt, boat shoes, gray trousers. Mm-hmm. Eugene didn't want to do that, and he was an asshole at that. It was just, I think those were the tough times, the rough times, and that sort of stuff. We get him into Bullis, which is a very expensive private school out in the county there, or here. And at that time, I was at the state ed department, and I was doing Maryland Tomorrow, which is a dropout prevention program for the state of Maryland, and running that program. And one of the schools that we put him in after, there was between the 7th and 8th grade at Bullis, they decided that they would not in the summer enroll him in the fall because he was an asshole there. And they wouldn't say that to me. And I finally took him out and put him in public school, and he was smarter than his teachers. It just created all kinds of problems. Out of that junior high into the school, he finished the high school out there, Quinch Orchard or something. I had a program there, and they knew that that was my son. Well, Eugene and 4 or 5 others never went to classes, and they were all in the same category, smarter than life. And I would go to that school for site visits, go inside doors and other things to prevent going through the principal's office. Not so that they would not have to say something to me about my son. So those were really difficult times for him. Got him into ROTC, and I'd make him shine his shoes and all of the other stuff. And between the house and the school, Eugene would put mud on his stuff to get the merit, and that would have been a scholarship for him. No. Hard times, bad times. I love my son, but it wasn't a spin image of his dad.
You didn't know that you didn't know that they had a brilliant.
I can't hear you.
Okay, she said you didn't know you had a brilliant son.
No, I didn't. Eugene was admitted to Howard, University of Maryland, Hampton. I thought I'd lie to him to go to, I wanted him out of the house. So I brought him down to Hampton, and what pissed me off at Hampton was the dean of students didn't want to talk to us. There was a group there from Gonzaga High School out of Washington. He says you can run around the campus with them. They didn't have a dormitory that he could live in, and he would have to live off campus. They gave me a list of all these places he could live. But we had lived through a summer exchange program where Eugene went to Spain and decided he didn't like the family that he was with. And we had given him cash money to use for things that he might need to that was not covered by. And Eugene took off from that. We had to get the American Embassy to find our kid.
Oh, wow.
Where
I
was it?
can't tell you anymore because this is bothering me.
That's okay. That's okay.
Wow. Wow. But what's kind of interesting is, Uncle Walter, you were smarter than your parents. Uncle Walter, you were more intelligent than your parents.
I don't think that had anything to do with it. They were still my parents, and you can't tell your parents to bone you or not bone you. So that's the way it is. That's the way it was. I think Daddy was a smart man. He knew stuff and how to do things, and he couldn't write his name. Mama only had about 6 grades.
Right.
That had
I was
nothing
told
to
that.
do with it. It was you can't you cannot determine who your parents are. Once you're here, you're here.
It's true.
It's
Yeah,
an acceptance.
Yeah, you pick your friends, you accept your family.
Sorry, say that again.
I heard that you pick your friends and you accept your family.
Yeah, and that's probably the truth. That's it. There's just no way out of it, you know? You still love them and you still appreciate them. And You can make amends for wherever they are and whatever they get to have or to be, but that's the way it is.
What's been the best times of your life? Were they the trips? Because you're famous
Yeah,
for
I think traveling has been wonderful. Dolores and I have been an interesting couple, and that's been exciting and good. Uh, it's been stabilization here in terms of a family, mom, dad, and a child. The unit, I think that's really something and something to be proud of. No divorce, that sort of stuff. Uh, I don't have to pat myself on the back, but I've done some exciting things and been in some exciting positions. Uh, the trip that really went home with me was our trip to Israel, and to sit there in the Garden Tomb area and to look out. They have it cordoned off and as a part of it. When Christ was crucified, he was crucified on Golgotha, and it is in the Bible the place of the skull. You can actually see the skull. You could actually visit the tomb. You could look at the Garden of Gethsemane. You could go down to where the manger was. Those were things that I think I talk to this day about. I jokingly say I rode around in an air-conditioned coat and Jesus rode on an ass, the donkey. But that trip was really, really it. And then the early part of that trip was to see the Sphinx, the pyramids, Tutankhamun's tomb, all of that, and to be on the Nile.
you did both Africa and Israel in one trip.
We started in Egypt, and then we joined the group in what's that place? It was in Jordan. Can't think of the name of it right now. But the first part of our trip was in Egypt, and that was where we saw the tombs and the early places and the Nile and all that. And then we joined with the rest of them. There were 41 people on our tour, but the first part of it, we were on like an excursion. Or it's like going to South Africa. When I went to South Africa, I stayed there for an additional 3 days so that I could go up to the falls, Victoria Falls. It wasn't a part of the tour. So we did Luxor in Egypt as an extra. But to visit those places and to see those places and to see the early churches that had the mosaics in the floor of the early tribes and all of that, God is real. That would be a really exciting trip. And that was reality.
How important has religion been in your life?
Well, I grew up in the church. Sunday was church Sunday, even with dad. And as an early child, that was it. I probably joined the church when I was 11, 12, or 13, somewhere around that. But Sunday was Sunday school, church, and then YPD, Young People Department. And that was Sunday evening. God has always been there and always a part of things. In the Marine Corps, my first military, it's called MOS, Military Occupational Specialty, was supply administration. I volunteered to become the chaplain's clerk, which took me into the battalion office area. And I would serve as a chaplain clerk for the early part of the enlistment. When I went to Vietnam, I was in 0311, and that meant that I was the bodyguard for the chaplain because I'd never been in an infantry unit. And for at least a couple of months, they didn't know what to do with me, but they sent me back to a chaplaincy. And then I would spend the rest of the time in Vietnam. I was in Vietnam for 13 months as a chaplain's aide or an assistant. I had 2 Roman Catholic priests. I was up in the northern part of the country, did mass and arranged for other services, built a chapel or 2, read to kids in orphanages, and then went out. Father Powell liked to swim, and on Wednesday we would say we're going out to the health ship, which was off the coast of Wei. We'd actually go to the beach. But I got to see the demilitarized zone and all of that because he arranged those trips for me on the helicopter. He was a lieutenant colonel, Navy. That's just before the general captain. So I got to do that. In fact, sometimes it would just be the 2 of us saying a mass because he said mass every day. And I would do the responses and he'd do the mass. I'd have to hide the altar wine. Both of them were alcoholics. He put me on a manifest to go to get him a bottle in Da Nang or wherever there was some booze. Hubble was the same way. I can't tell you how many times I didn't pick him up from the NCO club and throw him in the back of the Mighty Mike like a sack of potatoes and take him home, throw him on the rack. But that was, so I spent a lot of time with God and the church, even in the military. And I led for probably 12 years the National Capital Area Council's Protestant Committee on Scouting, set up the chaplaincy, Protestant chaplain at Goshen Scout Reservation. I still do some of that stuff. I haven't gotten out of that completely. The Pray program, which is a youth program, the Mormons used to use it, and the United Methodist Church used that program of religious organizations and services for youth, and that's the religious emblem program. I've plowed that through. Built a chapel at Goshen. All that's religious. Like I said, I could pat myself on the back for a lot of stuff. Hello, Sam.
I'm here. You done? I'm listening.
This is all good stuff.
Yeah,
All
I mean,
good stuff.
we're taking it all in. This was very, very good.
And I can prove all of it. I got certificates, and like I said, when I graduated, when I left the state ed department, I got a Senate citation. It's on a big thing for my work with infants and toddlers. I set up programs in the state in 81, 82 with the apprenticeship and training, federal level, state level, and the state education department. One of those, 44 programs, and only 3 of them would take kids from schools. None of them would take kids from Baltimore City, but that's another story. That's another round of things.
All right. So, what were your siblings like, personality-wise? Like,
My siblings?
yeah. So, what was Eartha like as a child?
Eartha was my young baby sister. So when she got pregnant with Tony, and she was there in Opelika, we brought her to New York. Annie and I were living in Clay Avenue there in the Bronx. And so she lived with us. Well, she didn't get along with Dolores, so I sent upstairs to her, Annie. Annie had just got married to Sanders, and Sanders ended up being a trip too. She got an annulment on that one. He didn't get along with her, so we sent her down to Julia. Julia didn't get along, so what did she do? She put her in the Y. Do I need to say more? You pretty much know what Annie happened to Annie. Annie decided somewhere in maybe junior high school or high school that she wanted to become a nun. And that's when she went off to Vincentian Sisters, and she had a brain hemorrhage and all of that. So there was not much there. Virginia and I lived together in the Bronx. And the year I went to New York in the summer and then decided not to come back to Alabama. And so Virginia and I lived together there. And then Sue died, and I had to come back to get money that was left in the will for me if I came back to school and went back to Tuskegee. So I came back south, and then when I went back in the summer, the next year, she had gotten a roommate, and Julia Clark. You know her, you've seen her at some of the events that we've done. Julia Clark Lee. Okay. So I had to get another place to live and that sort of stuff. But Virginia and I did live together there in that little apartment. The rest of them, or it's all been sort of an adult. I don't know. We've done more as adults.
Harvey.
The Christmas dinners and all of those things that I ran for 30 odd years or so was primarily because we had the space to do a large gathering in group and sitting people down and all that sort of stuff. But you came to a couple of those.
A few.
Yeah. So we were just brothers and sisters.
All right, but I mean, what were their personalities like? So, how would you describe Annie's personality?
I would have a hard time describing Annie's personality because a lot of it has been about God and God talk and that sort of stuff. Now, although I did a lot of stuff with God, I have not been an advocate of God in the sense of proselytizing. And Annie gets into that category. Virginia? Nah. Harvey, used to be the big guy that we all looked up to until he went Jehovah's Witness. And then after that, God, anybody wanted to spend any time there. And then it got to the point, well, we didn't. And then he sort of stopped messing with us every time we came there, and telling you going to school and all that sort of stuff was not good. Yeah. I don't know if I can say much about them other than they are the brothers and they're the sisters, and we love each other. And we don't mind getting together and being a pack and talking and walking through some things.
My mother was saying there's 3 of you who became heavyweights in the church.
Well, I guess you could look at it that way. Annie and Julia in latter years, but the early years, they were Catholics. And I think they still are offskirts of those. Sam, it just might have been the thing to do in terms of being Black and in the South, and preachers were one of the things you could do. Yeah.
He was somewhat like you. If he didn't like something, he didn't like it.
He was, my mom saying, in many cases, he was like you because personality wise, if he didn't like something, he just didn't like it.
Mm-hmm.
And you've always been a straight shooter. You either like it or you're going to rally against it.
Well, you just don't bother with it. I think that was a bit from home. If you were someplace and it wasn't your cup of tea, you could always come home. You didn't have to go to that. And you didn't have to be a part of that. And the other one would be the good name that you would want to have and where you would want to be with that. If you are in the public eye, where people are looking at you in other ways, it's always to stay away from anything that will bring ill. Let me talk about the board for the dropout, the National Dropout Center, that board. There was a guy on that. He was single. I would call him the Jim Brown kind of person. But he was known as a skirt chaser. And he had been, the vice president would become president. The vice president is president-elect. And boy, there was a lot of discussion about making him go up. And since he was a brother, us brothers got together and decided they weren't going to do that to us. But God knows, a good name was not a good name he had. And it was whether or not you wanted him representing the group. So I always worried about that. The other things, as the National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth, when I was president of that, 98 to 2000, whatever the president wanted in the organization, that happened. So there were groupies, but there were also people who were after you. And I often tell the story of one night being in Orlando, and we were at a conference there, and there was this woman from Nebraska, and she could have been a male chaser. And that evening I planned to go with a group of people to dinner, and it was all you could eat, seafood and all that other stuff. And then we were going to go to Pleasure Island there at Disney. And she came downstairs, and I'm there in the lobby talking and greeting and saying hello and all that. And she started